Good morning, church. Excited to continue our series, The Story Isn't Over. And we're going to officially talk about this in a couple weeks on our Celebration Sunday, the 7th. We got to do a Serve the City prayer last Sunday, but Friday especially, we were there helping set up for Sizzle and Sound. I think we had 10 people come, and we were wearing our Delta Church shirts, and it was a total win. Total win. Several times kept hearing, "Oh, thank you guys so much. You're a huge help," which was our goal. We wanted to be a blessing to the city, and they felt that. Had some really good conversations. So we'll have some pictures and some more about that. But for those who came out, thank you so much for doing that. It was just a really cool time with kind of our church group being part out in the town. And letting people know we actually exist here. How many times? Oh, where is that? Oh, it's about 100 yards that way, right there, a block away. But yeah, very cool night, Friday night. Thank you for serving those who could make it. Continuing, the story isn't over. This series on Joseph we've been in, the story isn't over. The problem we wanted to address with this series is when our circumstances don't match our God-given promises and dreams. When life doesn't seem to match. And yeah, sometimes we get it wrong. We misinterpret. We think God should be doing things that aren't really what he actually promised. It's what we want him to do. Sometimes we get it wrong, but what happens when we feel like everything that we know about God and from his scripture and what he's speaking to us is right, but life doesn't seem to match? Well, it's a reminder that the story isn't over. The story isn't over. And we've said these couple main takeaways for this series is that we operate in weeks and months. God operates in years, decades, and generations. He's writing a story that's bigger than us, and I'm grateful for that. We get to be part of a story that he's writing that goes beyond even our own lifespans. Yes, we're part of it, and he does things in our own lives, but we operate. It should be done by now, and God is writing a bigger story. So that's number one, and that also that God can take any and every part of our lives and turn it into something good. I hope you guys walk away. I hope I walk away with those deeply in my life. But yeah, God's writing a bigger story, and that every part of my life, the highs, the lows, the in-betweens, he can take it and turn it into something good, whether it's for me, for my family, for my church, for those around me, for other people. He can do that. So I'm going to invite you, if you can, to stand in honor of God's word, our reading of our theme verse for this series. This is from Genesis 50:20, and this is Joseph. He's summarizing kind of everything that happened. And so we've been skipping to the end every week just to get a glimpse of a reminder of how the story does end up for Joseph. And here's what Joseph says. Let's read it together. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Jesus, I ask that your word comes alive, that your spirit opens ears and hearts to do what you want to do in your church, your message, your word, your plan. In your name I pray, amen. You may have a seat, church. So God promised Abraham in Genesis, hey, I'm going to bless the whole earth through your family. And the rest of Genesis and truly the rest of the Old Testament kind of is like, really, this family? This is the family that somehow God's going to use to bless the earth? It is a very messed up family from the very beginning, even when it's Abraham's kids and grandkids. Joseph is Abraham's great-grandson. And then on throughout the story as the family becomes a nation, and the nation truly is no different from the wicked nations around them. They're not special, yet God keeps choosing them. God keeps sending heroes. God keeps doing things for the nation, for the family, because God promised, even though the family did not hold up their end of the bargain. Really, this family is going to be blessed? Really, this family is going to bless the whole world? How is that possible? That's one of the ways you could summarize the Old Testament. All right, so let's go through kind of our series so far. Here's the messages we've gone through in this series. The story isn't over. Ashley, she kicked it off with kind of the introduction sermon of what it was going to be about, and then we got into Genesis 37. Genesis 37, Joseph was given dreams, and then he was betrayed by his brothers. I spoke on that and how from the perspective of the brothers, their wicked act against Joseph actually ended up saving them in the end. They sent Joseph to slavery, but because of that, God, and we're going to see that today, God put Joseph in a position to save the very brothers who wanted to harm him. Their own evil act, God returned kindness to them. Kind of what Pastor Mary shared is even the attack against the mother, yet she returned in kindness. That's the kind of God we serve. Genesis 39, we read how Joseph is a slave in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife wants to sleep with Joseph, and in a moment of high temptation, he could have said, well, I deserve this. Look what God's done to my life. I deserve this moment. He resisted temptation. We had Pastor Ethan Robinson here, and it's a reminder that having feelings and temptations are not a sin. Having feelings, feeling feelings, being tempted, that's not a sin. Right? You can't control what feelings and temptations come, but we can control what we nurture and what we hold on to and what we make part of our own identity. And that even at the most basic level, we're called to holiness. Even in the mental level, we're called to holiness, called to trust God and do what's right. In Genesis 40, spoke how Joseph was faithful in prison. I called it T-ball faithfulness. Just swing at what's in front of you. Joseph, all right, he goes to Potiphar's house. All right, he's going to serve there. Joseph goes to prison. All right, he's going to serve there. And then it just happens, he just noticed how someone didn't look right. And he asked the two men how they were doing. And they told him the dreams, and Joseph interpreted the dreams. And that act of just asking someone how they were doing set in motion the way for Joseph to get out of prison. Just swing at what's in front of you. Just be faithful with the little things that God puts in front of you, and he can work some amazing things out of that. And then finally, Pastor Ashley preached last week on Genesis 41, where Joseph received a new name because other people saw God in him, and he gave new names to his children that reframed his suffering. The names of his children meant, God brought life out of my suffering. God made me forget my suffering. And how Joseph even chose to reframe his own story, the difficult things that happened to him. He recognized good came out of it. And today we're going to be in Genesis, I guess the end of 41 into 42. There's a lot to this story, and we can't cover it all. But here's the roadmap for today. If we can put that on the screen, here's the roadmap of where we're going to go. We're going to see how the story comes full circle. It's going to connect back to Joseph's very beginning, the very beginning of his narrative. It's going to come full circle. Then the next stop, we're going to see how the story points us to Jesus. And then finally, how we can see ourselves in this story and in relation to Jesus. The story comes first full circle. So we're going to start at the end of Genesis 41, verses 53 through 57. So here's how the story comes full circle. Genesis 41, verse 53. Here's what it says. At the last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end. Then 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine also struck all the surrounding counties, and people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. So 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. That's what Pharaoh's dream was. 7 years of plenty were going to come, 7 years of famine. And Joseph, because he helped interpret it, he got put in charge of the empire of Egypt. And notice how it says people from all around the known world of that time. I don't think people from Alaska were going to Egypt in that. They didn't know about Alaska then. But the idea that around the known world that they knew of, the famine was everywhere, and they were coming to Egypt, right, to get the food, the grain that they needed. Remember that concept. All around the world they were coming. Because Joseph had vision and foresight, and he saved up grain for 7 good years to be able to provide. And not just for his country, but from people from all around the world were coming. Then 42, we're going to go to 42 verses 3 through 6. Here's what it says. So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them, for fear some harm might come to him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. And since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, what did they do? They bowed before him with their faces to the ground. They bowed before him, their faces to the ground. And we're going to talk about that moment, how that is the coming full circle. But one note, I find it interesting how Jacob, what does he say? You can't take Benjamin. You can't take my youngest son. He's like my youngest special son to me, right? And he's kind of coddling and taking care of Benjamin. But that's what happened with Joseph in the first place. He protected Joseph. He made Joseph special, right? He was overprotective of him, and that caused some of the issues. Did Jacob learn his lesson? It seems like no. Once again, he's taken extra care of the youngest son, the son of the one of his 4 baby mamas, the one that he preferred. And that is kind of a reflection on what we do. We don't really learn our lesson very easily. We like control, right? Jacob's overprotective of Joseph, right? He again, the story going way back, he protected Joseph and Benjamin when an army was coming at them. He said, "Other kids, you can die first." Right? And now what is he saying? Other sons, you go to Egypt. I'm going to keep this youngest one safe. And we're so used to just going back to the things we know we can control, even if it causes harm. I think that's an interesting thing. Yeah, Jacob is someone God used, and he's known as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Even messed up people that go back to our same mistakes, God uses us. How does this passage end? The brothers bowed before Joseph. Bowed before him on the ground. Remember, how does the story begin? With Joseph telling his brothers he had a dream of 11 sheaves of wheat bowing down. Those sheaves represented his brothers. Hey, brother, a 17-year-old to grown man, hey, you're going to bow down before me. That wasn't probably the smartest way to do that from Joseph's part, but here's the moment. These dreams have now come true, have now been made reality. After all the ups and downs, being sold, taking over Potiphar's house, going to prison, interpreting dreams, being made king, all of a sudden now, there's this moment that I can't imagine what was going through Joseph's mind that he saw this. Like all the memory, like hits him like a ton of bricks probably. Oh my goodness, this is the dream God gave me like 13, 14 years ago if you kind of follow the timeline. It had to be like, I can't imagine what it would have been like to be in his mind in that moment. Jaw dropping. The way the story came together. I guess it made me think of this. It's just a cool kind of story. Did I include that picture of the couple from China? Did I give that to you to put in the slides? Oh man. Okay, well, go home and Google it. There's a couple that got married, Chinese couple, and they discovered that they were in a picture of each other from like 15 years before at a monument. Like the lady's over here, and in the corner is the husband, and the husband has a picture of himself. So they visited this monument and took a picture at the same time, and then like a decade later or more, they got married and realized they were in each other's pictures. Just a crazy cool coincidence. That's what made me think of. I'd seen that like as a meme at some point. Man, what a moment of how could Joseph ever have thought this was the way the dream was going to happen? I don't know if he even thought about those dreams anymore. As Ashley preached, he had already reframed his suffering. He already thought like, wow, God did it. I guess I'm the king of Egypt or whatever. I'm in control. And not that it was he was haughty about that, but just that, wow, God did it. He saved me. He rescued me. But here's the thing. What I'm calling the masterpiece moment was still to come. That masterpiece moment, the story wasn't over. Even when God had already rescued him and pulled him out, even when that happened, that masterpiece moment, that something else God still had in store. His story was not over. His story was not over. And there's a balance here. Sometimes the dark times we go through, we think, okay, that was pretty hard. Now I'm done with that. And sometimes God says, I'm sorry, but there's more to come. Look at Joseph's story. He probably thought being sold to Egypt was the worst thing possible that was going to happen to him. And then what happened? He ended up being falsely accused, and not just being in Egypt, but now in a prison, falsely accused in Egypt, right? And I want us to be a church that recognizes that, yes, sometimes suffering is going to be deeper and harder than we think it should be. And God is still good and faithful even when there's more difficulty to come. But I want to make sure we are also a church that understands that God has better things in store than we even realize. We want to be a church that embraces suffering and recognizes and weeps in the suffering, but it can't just stop there. We also have to be a church that recognizes that God is a good God, and he saves. Jesus, Yeshua, means God saves. He's not only there in the suffering, he wants to change suffering. We have to have that complete understanding and vision of how God works in our lives. And I think this is a good reminder that Joseph had his life reversed and God did amazing things, but the story wasn't over. There was still something even better to come, something else that God was going to redeem and make whole and do well in his life. This balance and this wholeness reminds me of amazing quote from Tim Keller, who was a pastor in New York. He passed on about a year ago or so. Here's what he says: the real Jesus requires more than you ever thought, but offers more than you ever imagined. The real Jesus requires more than you ever thought, but offers more than you ever imagined. Yes, Jesus calls us to pick up our cross with him, but he calls us into the fullness of the kingdom of God that he gives us. When we, and I'm not saying that I've mastered this concept and understand all the difficulty and all the goodness of the world or of Jesus, but I want to have that wholeness. I want to know Jesus in his sufferings and in the power of his resurrection, as Paul says. I want to know Jesus this way. I want to know God as the author of stories in this way. Yes, in the dark moments, but in the crowning moments, the champion moments, the blessing moments, more than we can ask or imagine, he has good things in store. This is what happens in our story. Joseph is there. I'm trying to picture like on a throne, probably, looking down at his courtyard, and he sees the brothers, and boom, it hits him. Wow, the rush of emotion, the rush of the impossibility of God orchestrating this, it hits him. And then the next few chapters are honestly pretty crazy, and we cannot go through it all, but Joseph, he sends his brothers away, but he puts their money in the bag, and then he keeps one brother as a prisoner, and he gives them a test, and then he makes them bring his younger brother back, and then he tricks them again, and he makes them think the younger brother is going to be a prisoner. I guess they deserved it. I guess he had the right. Pranks are good as long as like the ending is fun, right? Or I think I shared like you can joke with someone if you're joking about something being bad, but then like, oh, just kidding, it's actually good. That's a funny joke. You don't joke about something being good and then actually it being bad, right? You have to end on a high note. But there's a lot going on. I guess maybe Joseph's processing, the hurt and whatever. He's getting it back at them a little bit. But finally, after like the third time of his brothers being there, this is Genesis 45 now. Genesis 45, verse 2. Joseph broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried it to the Pharaoh's palace. I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? Even though he asked this like 8 times already. But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. I can't imagine that as well. Like, brain would have to be turning in slow motion and like sludge of like, 15 years of history, and like, there's no way. He must have heard something somehow, and they're playing a joke on us. They were stunned. Please come closer, he said to them, and they came closer, and he said, I am Joseph. I'm your brother whom you sold into slavery. But don't be upset. Don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. It was God who sent me ahead of you to preserve your lives. What a perspective Joseph had. Don't be upset. I mean, he wasn't saying you should have done it or you should keep doing it, but he recognized God's hand in it. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to what? To make my life better? No, to preserve your lives. This is a key understanding of this passage and again of Genesis and the Old Testament. The story isn't necessarily about Joseph. He's the main character, but the story isn't about Joseph. It's about preserving the family, the whole family, the brothers. Think of the original hearers and readers of the story. These brothers became the tribes of Israel. These were the people of Israel, and they recognized our country, our family got saved because of what Joseph did for all the rest of us. Right? They would see themselves as the brothers because they were from the tribe of Judah or Gad or Asher or Reuben. These are the brothers' names. My tribe is alive because of what Joseph did for us, right? That's how they would have and should have read the story. All right, let's recap Joseph's story in graph form. Who loves graphs? Yeah, Pastor Amy. Yeah. All right, so I do this assignment for all of my SCU classes. I don't know, did I do it in our OT class? I think it might have been a bonus for bonus points. But, okay, here's Joseph's life. Let's graph out how his life seemed to go. All right? The higher up on the screen, the more attractive that position in life would be. I guess the higher the better, the lower the worse, right? Pretty easy to follow on that concept. So Joseph's life starts. He's the privileged son, right? He's the special son. He gets a fancy coat. His dad thinks he's awesome. Everyone wants our dads to think we're awesome, right? He's got privileged. He's got all that he needs in life. He's pretty set. Then what happens? Boom, he's sold into slavery. Not good. See how the line goes down? Because that's a down thing in life. I would not want that to happen. Right? He's sold into slavery, but then things get a little bit better. He ends up running Potiphar's house. Pretty good. And then what happens? Uh-oh. Extra down. Boom. Wrongly sentenced to jail. All right, so his life has gone from pretty good, pretty set. I'm the apple of my dad's eye, and now I'm in jail after being sold. A lot of bad things. But he's faithful in jail. And from the very, very lowest point, what happens? All of a sudden, Pharaoh elevates him to be put over the entire nation of Egypt. Right? What a roller coaster of a life that is. Right? Pretty good, not so good, little bit, then it gets way worse, but then all of a sudden it gets reversed in an instant. Pharaoh takes him from the prison of wrongly accused criminals and puts him, second in command, but basically the way it says is he's in charge. Pharaoh, he's not in charge of Pharaoh, but Pharaoh basically is like, you're in charge of the country. He lets him run the country. Joseph is the governor, the king essentially of the country. That's how Joseph's story went. Now here's what I have my students do, is compare this to how Jesus, the story of Jesus that we have, especially the way that Paul presents it in Philippians 2. Let's read Philippians 2, 6 through 11. This could have been Paul writing, but there's a lot of thought that this was a hymn the early church sang, and he's kind of quoting a song. Right, so they would sing this most likely as a hymn from the church. Here's what it says. Though he was God, Jesus, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and didn't just live as a human, but he then what? Died a criminal's death. Was he a criminal? No, wrongly accused, but died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, what did God do? God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Glory of God the Father. So let's look at, if we graph this out, if we graph this hymn out, what would it look like? Because Jesus started with divine privileges, is the way it's phrased, and he humbled himself and became a human slave. Things were going pretty good for a few years there. Like, people were following him. People wanted to make him king. But all of a sudden, what happened? He was wrongly sentenced to death on a cross. And there's images. 2 Peter presents that Jesus went into the prison, down into the prison of hell, something like that. There's a prison imagery there. He went to the cross through faithful obedience. And then what does it say? God elevated him to the place of highest honor. Now, it's not saying that Jesus, like, he was God before and he was God after. So it's not like, it's a weird thing to kind of understand that it's not like Jesus became better. But the way Paul phrases it is, because of what Jesus did, dying and rising again, there's now even more to praise him for. There's even more reason God elevated him to the place of highest honor, right? So that every knee should bow before him, every tongue confess that he is Lord. Do you see how this matches Joseph's life? I think in a pretty interesting way. Humbled himself, not just as a human, which we have to recognize that the step from God in heaven to human on earth is a bigger step than Joseph to slave in Egypt, right? We have to recognize that. It's not like, oh, he came to earth, but, earth is pretty nice. Sure. But the step between God and himself in heaven to a person on earth, even if Jesus was the king of all earth, it would still have been a lower step than Joseph going from son to slave. Does that make sense? Jesus he humbled himself. He let go of his lofty position. Not just that, but then even to death on a cross. And if you understand the way crucifixion was talked about in that culture, and we'll preach about on it at some point, being crucified was not just like a bummer. It was like you wouldn't even talk about crucifixion at dinner parties. It was like, no, don't. That's so disgusting. We don't even talk about that. That's the death Jesus faithfully obeyed to go into. But then what happened? God elevated him to the place of highest honor, gave him the name above all names. Joseph's story is a foretaste of Jesus' story. It's a foretaste of Jesus' story. And just as, okay, so here's part 3 now. That was part 2. We saw how that story points us to Jesus. How do we see ourselves in this story? How do we see ourselves? Well, on one minor point, I do believe God has better things in store than we even realize. I believe he's a God who likes fun surprises. I picture God in that moment when Joseph sees his brothers. God's probably like, yes, that's so cool that I did that. I mean, I think just it's so tiny, but like a couple weeks ago, our son turned 3, and we spent a couple hours putting monster truck balloons on the wall. So in the morning, for 5 seconds, he could go, wow, there's balloons, and then he moves on to something else. But like those 5 seconds of wow, like for us, it was a fun, like we wanted him to have that fun surprise, right? And it gave us delight to surprise him in that way. So how much more does the author of all life, I would like to think he delights when we get fun surprises in our life. So I think that's the kind of God we follow, and I want to be the kind of people that lives in constant hope that God is writing some really cool things in our life, even through prison-type times. The whole series is about how God orchestrated years of difficult circumstances to save the lives of others. So yes, God takes our difficult circumstances, turns them into good for us and those around us. That's in the story, absolutely. The main point, the main way I want us to see ourselves in the story here is that just as Joseph was the main character who saves the world, right, the whole world, so Jesus is the main character that brings salvation to the world, and we're the brothers. We're the ones out in the famine. And I know I'm talking to a group of church people, people I think who are following God, but it's a reminder that our ability to sustain ourselves, our ability to provide sustenance for ourselves is eventually going to be at risk. Just like in Joseph's time, the ability to feed yourself, to grow crops and live was at risk. Now, sometimes it's for our own foolishness, and sometimes it's because famine hits, things outside of our control, and we realize, I can't sustain myself. I can't fill myself. I can't provide everything I need for the deepest parts of me. We realize we're not going to survive on our own efforts. We are the brothers in this story. Like the brothers, just like those brothers who have to go where? To the king that has all the bread. They had to go to the king with all the bread. We have to as well go to the king, not just who has all the bread, but who is the bread of life. We exist in a famine, or famine's going to hit at some point where we can't fully nourish the deepest parts of us. We have to go where? To the king who has the bread of life in store, who has enough for us. So refusing to come to the king will result in a slow death. And I think some people live like this. They die slowly, chasing after things that aren't going to satisfy. You can choose that, refuse to come to the king, or come, bow before the king, and live and thrive. What does bowing down mean? It's saying, you're the boss. You have something I need. You have something I can't give myself. You're in charge. So church, maybe you've been living churchy things for all your life and you've never truly bowed before Jesus. Today's the invitation. Or just maybe today you're feeling dry and empty. Well, he's waiting. He said, I'm the bread of life, and he says, whoever comes to me will never be hungry. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. He said this, and some people didn't like this. They didn't understand it. Some people left. And he turns to his disciples, and he says, are you going to leave too? And what does the disciples say? Where else are we going to go? So church, where else are you going to go to find the things that fulfill you and nourish you if it's not Jesus? And I would contend, you can keep plowing those fields. I don't know if this is hitting anybody or you need to hear, but keep plowing the fields of career or keep plowing the fields of finding identity and being whatever. Keep plowing those fields, but I would contend that ultimately they're not going to nourish the deepest parts of you. Makes me think of the soil on Mars. Do we have a picture of that? Was that in there? There's a pretty cool book and movie called The Martian where an astronaut crash lands there, and he ends up like growing potatoes. He used like human waste to grow potatoes. It's a kind of cool movie. But that's not the whole point of the movie. It's not that, but that he survives. But someone was asking, like, if you had the perfect temperature on Mars, if you had, the temperature was good, you could build a dome, you had plenty of water, what could you grow in Martian soil? And the answer is nothing. Even if you had perfect temperature, sunlight, and water, because the soil itself isn't alive. Right? The soil that we know of has living things that create the right gases that and the nutrients that plants need to live. And so, and in the same way, I would contend you can create the perfect life of all the things that you need. You can have house, and you can have career, and you can have money, and you can have fame, you can have status, you can have all of that. But I think without the bread of life, it's not going to ultimately grow because it's not alive at the core the way that Jesus makes us alive. You can have all those things right. All those things right. And there's accounts and stories of people rich and famous, and they feel like they're not satisfied. And I would say it's Martian soil. You're getting all the things right except the very point of growth. We need the bread of life. We need the Creator, the one who made us and knows us. I'm going to invite our worship team back up. We're going to end with a worship moment today. And church, here's the takeaway, is to come and keep coming to Jesus, who is the bread of life that satisfies, who has the words of life. Philippians says, every tongue will declare that Jesus is Lord. He's the name above all names. Here's the last slide I'm going to put up. Here's why we're doing this. If we mirror Joseph's life and Jesus' life, and if we're the people around the earth that are in famine and need the king who has all the bread, then the image of them coming before the king and bowing down is like us worshiping the king, saying you're the name above all names. When you declare that Jesus is Lord, it's like you're asking for the food that you need to survive. When you declare Jesus is the name above all names, it's like you're the brothers asking Joseph the king for the food they need to survive. So we're going to end with worship, declaring you are worthy. That song we sang, you are worthy. And in that way, we're saying, Jesus, you are what I need. The deepest parts of me need the bread of life that only you can fill. You're the name above all names. You're the king with all the bread. You're the king who is the bread of life. We're gonna spend a few moments in worship as our response to say, yeah, I can't do it. I'm in famine. I need you. But the good news is his supply of bread will never run out. You won't go hungry. He said that. You won't go hungry. You won't go thirsty. Let's worship him today and know he has good things in store. He will not let us go hungry. He won't.
My cross you bore, so I could live in the freedom you died for. And now my life is yours, and I will sing of your goodness forevermore. Shame is gone. I stand amazed in your love undeniable. Your grace goes on, and I will sing of your goodness forevermore. Is your name Jesus? You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Be exalted now in the heavens as your glory fills this place. You alone deserve our praise. You're the name above all names. Be
So church, here's the call. Is this week you're feeling empty, feeling low? Declare that Jesus is the name above all names. And Jesus, I'm trusting you to be faithful to your promise that we will not go hungry when we call on you. I trust, Jesus, that you are good and faithful to fill us, sustain us, and give us what we need. We declare you are King above all kings, name above all names. I believe he's faithful, church. Lift him up this week. All right, this will be our official end of service.